This is what happens when you make your own notes. Okay. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am Joanna Holden. I'm an author of Christian fantasy as well as being a vlogger here on AuthorTube. And today's video is the second in a current running series of videos all about fantasy world building. Today's video focuses on one of the most complex and easy to mess up parts of world building. It's about magic systems. If you haven't watched the first video on world building, I'm going to put the link in the description box below, or you can go straight to my channel and find it under the playlist Fantasy World Building. Be sure to watch that before you watch this video. For once you've watched it, come back and enjoy. Magic systems are probably one of my favorite parts about fantasy. It's what makes it fantasy, is what makes it fantastical. Can you have a fantasy without magic? Technically, yes, because fantasy is a speculative fiction genre, which means that if you're creating your own world, I think it technically still counts as fantasy, but most fantasy novels and sagas revolve around some kind of magic. Even if it's that newly popular, magic has been gone for centuries, at some point there was magic, so you still have to sit down and figure out what that magic looked like, even if it doesn't really affect the plot very much at all. The biggest problem with magic systems is that there's a lot of expectation for them. I think we can all think of fantasy novels and fantasy movies where we've seen a character literally pull a magical ability out of thin air and all of a sudden be able to do this amazing thing, and then it doesn't come back again into the story. Or we've seen where a magician mentor type person will express a rule or a law about magic to a mentee, or whatever you call them, the person that they're taking care of, the person that they're training. And then in the story somewhere later, something will happen that directly contradicts what was said earlier as a stated law of magic. One of the things that is nice about magic is that it is not impossible to goof up your magic system a little bit here and there in your plot and still have dedicated fans, which is all the more reason to really focus it on your plot and not depend on your world building to sell your books. But the best results that you will get as an author are going to come when you have well thought out, well crafted, logical yet fun magic system. It's what audiences are looking for, it's what they're expecting, and if you give it to them, they will keep coming back for book after book after book. The goal is to develop a magic system that is interesting and logical enough that they can suspend disbelief and get lost in this world that you've created. So where do you begin? Research! Yay! But seriously, you do have to do research for magic systems. Now, I will be laying out in this video some of the basics, so hopefully you have something to go on. But really, you are going to want to do some digging here and decide what works best for your story. The number one thing I would recommend that you look up is Sanderson's Laws of Magic. Sanderson is an author ridiculously famous for writing fantasy worlds where the magic systems are unique and well crafted and engaging and logical but fun at the same time. And his points on how to develop your magic system are invaluable. I'm going to include the link to his website in the description box below so that you can go and read the full articles surrounding his laws. But for sake of time and clarity, and since it's not technically my ideas, I'm just going to give you what he said, the first just the basic laws that he's stated as kind of an introduction to magic systems. Law number one, and I'm going to read it to make sure that I don't get it wrong. Law number one, an author's ability to solve conflict with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic. Law number two, the limitations of a magic system are more interesting than its capabilities. What the magic can't do is more interesting than what it can. I think that's actually a paraphrase of what he said. That's not the actual what he said, but it's pretty much what he said. Law number three is expand what you already have before adding something new. So if we break those laws down really quickly and just look at what they're saying in essence. The first is, if magic really isn't that important to the storyline itself, then you don't need to make it important. You don't need to go to great lengths to explain it. You don't need to go to great lengths to dissect it for your audience. However, if magic is used to solve conflict after conflict, if it's part of your character journey, if it's part of the big conflict in your world, then you're going to have to explain it, and in some detail. The trick is to do it without info dumping, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Law number 2, I love, because the limitations really are more interesting than the possibilities. You have a character who is burdened with this great power and these great responsibilities, but the part of him that or her that make them interesting is the fact that they have all this power, yet they still have weaknesses. They have all of this power, and yet they are still flawed people. Or the times when they're tempted to use the power for wrong. Those kinds of things are what make a story and what keep audiences coming back. So be careful when you're trying to give a power of excessive, unlimited type quantities to any character, because it really is true that the limitations are kind of more interesting to read about. And of course, the last one, basically just saying, don't go crazy throwing in random stuff throughout the story. Figure out what you've got, and then as you get through the conflict in the story, use what you already have before deciding to throw in a new ability to save the day. See if there's a way that you can work with what you already have to solve that conflict. See if there's a way that what you already have will explain what's going on or add to the character's journey, instead of all of a sudden having them discover this object or discover this or discover that wasn't originally part of your plan. It will keep your story so much more centered and focused, and it's so much easier to draw an audience in based on a single idea than on a million ideas going a million different directions. Hope that makes sense. So really, for starters, what you want to determine is how involved your magic is going to be with your story. We've all heard the terms soft magic versus hard magic. Let's talk about what those really mean, because for a long time, I was honestly confused. I think most people would agree that soft magic is where the magic in your story is more of a background to your story. It comes into play here and there, but it really is more of an ambience to your story. It's more like what makes the different races or creatures interesting. It's more like, maybe where the big bad got his power. But it's not really what your character's first go-to is going to be for solving a conflict or for any number of things. Because of that, it doesn't have to be exhaustively explained to the audience, because it's not really so important. Hard magic systems, on the other hand, are at the root of your story. They're so deeply entwined into your story. They have all of these laws, they have all of these limitations, they have all of these variations, and they require a butt ton of explanation in your story because they're everywhere. Now, again, if you want to avoid info dumping, you're going to want to do some research on good methods for explaining things through your narrative, dialogue, and other means, instead of direct info dumping. And for those of you who don't know what info dumping means, that's where you have a ton of information that the audience needs to know and you don't know how to tell them, so you just dump it all in one giant expository paragraph or a couple of pages. And it's really hard to read through that, so a lot of people would argue that that's not the best way to do it. Sometimes it is completely inescapable. You have to info dump for a minute, but it's best to avoid if possible, and definitely not in huge chunks. Fortunately, you don't necessarily need to pick one or the other. A large portion of fantasy novels and sagas fall in a nice sweet spot in between the extreme of soft and the extreme of hard. They don't have all of the detailed, ridiculous explanations that needed for hard magic, but they also aren't just kind of there for ambience. They actually do affect the story. So there is a nice in-between that you can fall into, which is also something I didn't know until more recently. The important thing is to decide how much involvement there will be of the magic system in your story so that you know how much to explain it to your audience. The next thing you want to consider is what kind of magic you're going to be using. And there are two sets of contrasting kinds of magic that you can use. And a lot of authors will actually use a combination of the contrasts. So number one is natural magic versus learned magic. Natural magic literally comes out of the character's DNA. It's part of their race. It's part of maybe the world that they were brought up in. Using this magic is the same to this character as exercising any muscle in their body would be. It's a natural part of who they are, or a natural state of being in the world. Learned magic does not require a certain bloodline or certain genes, or that you have happened to be, in this giant lab, before you fell into the pot full of mess that made you into a superhero. It doesn't require any of that. It simply requires that you have talent and you be able to learn a skill. And we see this a lot with like wizarding schools, and even with those, a lot of times you'll find people combining the natural and the learned. This is actually a great combination. Most kinds of magic systems will involve a little bit of natural and a little bit of learned, and mush them together so that you have that natural magic, and yet it can still be learned and trained, and you have to grow. Just like working out those muscles, you would have to work it out to be able to be really good at it at all. The second set is light magic versus dark magic. Light magic is what most people would call like the good magic. It can be used for war, but it's really more useful for, prosperity and peace and all that stuff. It's usually what holds the world together. Dark magic, on the other hand, is the no-no magic. It's the magic that your characters are usually warned against using because it is too powerful, or it tends to evil, or it requires human sacrifice, or something like that. It's the bad magic of the story. And again, a lot of times in stories, you'll see a combination of the two used. You'll have the good and bad magic fighting back and forth, good and evil and all that. To this list, I would add, there is also a neutral magic that is oftentimes used as well. It's more of just like an energy that either side can use, and it's just a natural state of being. It's not something that's particularly evil or particularly good. So you need to figure out, do you want all natural, all learned combination of the two? Do you want there to be a light and dark, or do you want it just to be neutral? Just figure out what kind of magic you're working with, and then let's move on to the next part. There are 4 basic categories within this category that you're going to want to consider when creating a magic system. Number 1 is source and origin. What does your magic stem from, and how did it come into being? There are some basic, most common sources for magic are going to be energy, or a force, or nature itself. It's more of a science really than it is like a mystical thing. It's part of nature. The next is DNA, or race, or bloodline, where it's part of your physical makeup as a person. It comes out of you. The next is to be assigned this power by a person, so you would have a higher being, maybe a god or a goddess, or something of that nature, where they bestow powers on others. And the last is objects, substances, and words. So anything that can be manipulated as long as you have it. This is used oftentimes for learned magic systems, where if you have the right substance, you have the right objects, you have the right words, you can do what you want with it. And again, it can also be a combination of these things. For instance, you could have a god or goddess character who bestows magical powers and abilities on these characters, and yet their powers are enhanced or maybe dampened by use of certain magical objects that maybe were stolen from the god or goddess's palace and brought to Earth, or what have you. There's any number of combinations of these, and most interesting magic systems are not as simple and straightforward as just, well, it's all energy and there you go, flat out, just done. Usually they're going to have a combination of the two. Not that you can't make just energy or just articles interesting, but just that most are going to combine them. And of course, where did it come from? Was it created on purpose by a higher being? Was it an explosion in a lab that just kind of poof? There's this magical article now. Did it grow out of nature? Is it more of like an evolved process? This is where deciding if it's natural, learned, light, dark, neutral, this is where all that's going to come into play, because how your magic got to your world is going to have huge effects on history later, and on cultures later, and on things of that nature. The second step is going to be deciding its use and its manifestation. Who can use it, and how can they do that? So how is this magic accessed? Who can access it and who can't? How can they use it? Do they have to use a combination of words and substance? Do they have to concentrate on meditation? Does it just kind of happen as an emotional response to things? Do they have to travel somewhere to get it? Do they have to be assigned this magic by that higher power? Does its use vary from person to person? Does it require training and mentoring and learning how to best use it and focus it and channel the energies? Can it be traded or bought or sold or stolen? Think about how it can be used, who it can be used by, and how like what it looks like as it is being used, like what its manifestation is and how it might affect people in the story. Step number 3 is limitations and the price. This is the part where Sanderson's law comes in handy. You really want to nail down its limitations and the price that you have to pay for using it. Now, the limitations, they may take a little bit longer to figure out than the price. The price can be something as simple as it just wears you out to use it. Or as simple as, maybe you physically buy it with money. It literally costs a price to buy it, and there's no negative impact. Most magic systems require like a negative use for using magic that is not your own, and then maybe like a positive use or a positive effect for having used magic that is your own. That's up to you, and if you're using light and dark or natural or whatever, but just be aware that that is a thing. How can the users not use this magic? Does one element or object or person trump another one? If you have one power, can you not access certain magical objects because your magic doesn't work with them? If magic is not DNA restricted, is it limited to the physical or mental strength of its user? Is your magic only as good as you are physically or mentally trained in it? Is it infinite, like an energy that just never runs out? Or is there a visible cap off where you drain enough of it and it's just gone? What does it cost the user? Does it wear them out? Does it age them? Does it scar them? Does it drive them mentally insane? Does it maybe make them susceptible to other spells? Is there a literal price that they have to pay where they purchase it with money? And if so, will they eventually use it up and have to go get a refill? How does that even work? If it does come from the world itself, will using it drain the world of its life force? You want to think about these things, the limitations and the price. This is where a lot, especially if you have more of a hard magic system than a soft, where a lot of your story conflict can come from. Don't be afraid to dig in deep, get nitty-gritty, get detailed, and honestly be a little bit morbid about the not so happy side of your magic system. This is, again, where the conflict is going to come from in your story and with your magic. It's also what's going to make it logical and believable, and again, interesting to your readers. They want to see your characters struggle, and if your characters are using magic, they don't want it to be just some, oh, I'm in this terrible predicament, and oh, I say the magic word and everything is fine, the big bad is gone, we all live happily ever after. That would be a very boring story. What you want is for the character to have to struggle and fight, and magic systems are an amazing, amazing way to provide that without really needing that much external conflict. Your magic system in itself is complex, and it has rules, and there are some variations on it, but there's also some things that you can and cannot do, X, nil, never mind. And lastly, number 4, the effects on culture and character. When you have something like a magic system that affects everybody, even if it's just a backstory or an ambience, it is still going to affect the cultures in this world. You want to start asking yourself a lot of questions with this. How do different societies react to the magic that is in this world, or the magic that used to be and is no longer in this world? Do they have to keep it a secret in one country where it is celebrated in another? Is it all the way around the world pretty much looked on as a no-no practice, or is it odd and its users are viewed as gods even though they aren't? Are the users marveled at, feared, envied? Do they just annoy people because stupid magic users are going around causing problems again? And remember, try and keep it varied. Have your different societies have different takes on the magic based on maybe their experiences, maybe based on their religion, maybe based on their political system and how the magic affects that. Do your magic users live in all societies or some societies, or do they have their own separate culture, like an entire nation or an entire people group where it's all magic users? A magic user or someone is there maybe someone who collects magical articles and sells them? Can the magic itself, can you be hired to use your magic for other people? Are there kings and queens who are on the lookout to hire people with magic? Or maybe to sell them on the black market for it. We've seen that in magic systems before. And it's been very, very heartbreaking and emotional and awesome. So those are the 4 basic steps when it comes to magic systems in world building. In real quick review, you have the source and origin of the magic, its use and manifestation, its limitations and the price for it, and its effects on culture and characters. Once you have those things nailed down and in great details, your story will come to life in ways you never thought that it would. Just go back to old, the way that we were in school and start asking the whole, who, what, where, when, why, and how. Just go back to those questions. Just keep asking questions about your magic system. The more questions that you ask, the better you'll understand it, and then the better your audience will understand it by default. Well, there you have it. That is magic systems in world building and the end of our video. I hope you liked it. If you did, be sure to click the like button and consider subscribing on the way out so you can continue to get more amazing videos like this. And if you want to get them immediately, you can just hit the notification bell. I think it's over here, maybe it's over here, I don't know. It's somewhere right down there, and it'll send notifications right to your phone whenever I post the next video in this series. You can feel free to check me out on social media. I post about my stories, I post Riley inspiration, fun stuff all the time. The links are down in the description box below, as well as the link to my author website, where you can learn more about me, the books that I'm writing, and the services that I offer to writers, including the workbook that will be coming with this video series. I hope you all have an amazing rest of the weekend of writing, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye! It's really hard to sit against this wall. Like, this wall is very uncomfortable. Okay. Okay. I have my nice handwritten notes here because we ran out of computer space and I forgot to do that part, so.